Once again, I had a completely different episode planned for today, and once again, Master of Malt have delivered me something that I just couldn't quite pass up the opportunity to review. Welcome back, Dram Fam, to the Whisky Diary. This week was supposed to be my Mac Mirror video about my trip over to Sweden to hang out at the distillery, but unfortunately I got a bit of the way through editing and I had to generate proxies. For those of you who don't know, I'm not going to bore you, basically the files are so big it makes it really difficult to edit. So you make like tiny little versions of the video, you edit those and you swap them out automatically. Problem is, it means I've got to leave my editing workstation on for like 8 hours running. So I couldn't do that, I had to get a video out this week. And then I got a delivery. Last week's video was, of course, the 6-year-old Speyside from Master of Malt, which was one of their like independently bottled things. I actually found out, I mean, it does say on the back, I could have just read it, that Master of Malt originally started as an independent bottler back in 1985, and then they went into the retail space. So they were originally an independent bottler, and I guess they've kind of returned to form, as it were. Anyway, we're not talking about this. We're talking about this. This is from their same range. This is another one of their own bottlings, but you could argue this is the opposite of what we reviewed last time. Now, I did pay for this. I made it sound like in the intro that I got this for free. I did not get this for free. I buy all of my bottles. There is nothing wrong with being sent review bottles for nothing. I am not big enough to get sent review bottles, so I buy all my whiskey, and for now, I'm okay with that. But anyway, this is a 31-year-old Girvan that was bottled by Master of Malt. Being a Girvan, of course, this is a lowland, although it is a grain whisky. It is bottled up at 54.6%. It is, of course, one of their single cask whiskies. Comes in a 70 centilitre bottle. It is unchill filtered. I believe it is natural colour. It doesn't say, but none of their bottles actually say whether they are natural colour or not. And given the age, we can have a fair assumption that that's natural colour. It is completely unpeated. It has spent all 31 years of its maturation in, it just says bourbon cask on here, but it does say on the internet that that this is a refill bourbon cask, which we'll get to in a minute. And lastly, and most interestingly, this bottle is $85.95. Now wait, I know that is very expensive, but if you stick around, I'll explain why that's quite so interesting. On this channel, we don't make a big deal about age. I have got a lot of no age statement whiskies that I'm absolutely in love with. I've got a lot of young whiskies. I mean, even like last week, that 6-year-old Speyside, I absolutely love it. Older whiskey does not necessarily mean that it's better. But when it comes to grain, things are a little bit different. Now, that's not to say there are not good young grain whiskies out there, but generally, to my palate, I think older grains taste better to a point. Now, I've had a few Girvan whiskies before. I do quite like Girvan. I've got a 15-year-old back there and a 14-year-old back there, both of which are lovely. But this is just a little bit different. Obviously, this is at aged 31 years, which is an extraordinary amount of time for a whiskey. I'm going to go into it a little bit more at the end because I want to talk about that, and that's a lot to do with why it's priced the way it is and why I believe you're getting a very good deal. But for now, let's get on to tasting it. On the nose, absolutely tons of like rich toffee, sugary sweetness. There's a nuttiness going on in there, like sugared almonds, honey roast peanuts. But as you kind of get more accustomed to it, you can start to pick up some of the brighter notes that are in there. It's got like a bitter lemon. If you ever had like bitter lemon, it's like a replacement for tonic. It's got that kind of almost effervescent on the nose, but there's a bitterness. It's got like a dark sourness going on. And what I find really interesting is, on the nose, there's a bit of a smokiness. Now, it's definitely not peat. There's no like TCP iodine notes going on in here. Not to my nose anyway, but I can smell like smoke, which I'm assuming has literally just come from those bourbon casks. Bourbon casks are quite commonly fairly heavily charred on the inside, and so I think it's a little bit of that smokiness from that charring has really made its way in over time, because it's like a nice sweet smokiness. It's not quite barbecue. It's more like, you know, bonfire on the beach, but like really subtle. Onto the palate. Texture-wise, really thick and like creamy. First thing I get is like a really nice peanut brittle, a peanut caramel. If you ever had it, it's like a sheet of caramel with peanuts in it. Absolutely lovely. Bit of a praline note going on. Subtle chocolatiness. Just loads of oak, like really good sweet wood notes. It's almost like an orange liqueur note going on as well. I wouldn't say it's orangey, but it's got that nice, really sweet, slightly bitter, and a little bit of a tannic thing going on right on the tail end. Overall, just a really juicy, sweet palate. Finish-wise, initially very sweet. Some more of that smoke barrel char starts to make an appearance. A little bit more black pepper as well. It's got a really quite distinct pepperiness going on, especially on the back of the tongue. As that fades away, some more tannic notes start coming through. Like I can really feel the kind of dryness in the sides of my cheeks. And it just keeps going and going and going. And as you kind of breathe out, you get that retronasal olfaction. Some more like smoky caramel notes, and then it gets a bit more tannic, and then you kind of get some sweetness coming back. It's got a beautiful, long, evolving finish. Upon going back to it, actually that smoke's really starting to come forward. Get some nice apple notes on the nose as well. On the palate, nice oak, bit of honeycomb coming through as well. And the finish initially stays quite sweet on the front, but yeah, a lot more of that pepper and a little bit more of that smoke coming through on the back end. I thought it'd be interesting to try this with a drop of water. So there's probably a couple of teaspoons in there. That nose brightens up, a lot sweeter, like a lot more fresh fruit, fresh apple, green apple. Palate-wise, nice icing sugar, like that kind of quite almost sickly sweetness, but I don't think I think the texture suffers a little bit for it. It becomes a lot more like gloopy, like watery gloopy than like thick and rich. So in summary, what do I think? I absolutely love it. Now, it is expensive. This is what I want to talk about. It is expensive. £90 for a bottle of whiskey is like right up at the top end of what I think a lot of people are really prepared to spend for if you are a drinker, if you're not a collector, if you're talking about something you're going to drink. £90 is a lot of money, but I've got some prices of similar whiskies, I guess you could say. Now, I appreciate you can't compare one whiskey to another. There's all kind, especially when it comes to independent bottles, there's all kind of subtle differences between them, but generally what you're getting for the price: Cooper's Choice 28-year-old £125, Red Cask Company 26-year-old £160, Great Dram's 14-year-old £75. I got a bottle of that back there. These are all Girvans, and I mean, I can speak for the Great Dram's one. It is lovely, but there's something about this which is just a little bit warmer, a little bit more well-rounded, and honestly, to my palate, just tastes like a slightly more refined product. The thing with grain is that it needs great attention and care, and it needs time in wood. Now, the issue is you use a cask that's too active, you end up getting way too much flavour into it over that amount of time, but the actual spirit itself hasn't had time to lose its feisty chemicaliness, which is something that I tend to find in younger grain whiskies. That only goes with time. You can't just put it in an active cask and use cask flavour to mask it. It actually needs time. The issue with that is, if you give it too much time and the cask is too active, you end up getting it over oaked. Now, that's a kind of term we use for when there's too much of the wood flavour in the whiskey, and they can often lead to like bitter, nasty, it's like really strong tannic flavours. It can really affect the texture as well, make it feel really drying, and just, it's not a pleasant drink. This is like perfectly balanced. It's been in a cask that's not so active that it can spend 31 years of its life. You're talking about 185 bottles, I think. 185 bottles in a run. So they're not getting a huge amount out of that cask. but it's been left in there for exactly the right amount of time to give it exactly the right amount of flavour, to knock off just enough of the grain notes but still let the grain speak for itself and allow enough of the flavour from the cask to get into it. That is something that I think you're really going to struggle. Once again, kind of demonstrating someone at Master of Malt really knows what they're doing when it comes to bottling whiskey and getting it out of a cask and into a bottle at just the right time. I think this is something that, again, if you're looking to spend a little bit of money, I probably wouldn't go for it if it's your first grain whiskey. Grain can be a bit hit or miss with some. Actually, wait a sec. Atom Brands, the parent company of Master of Malt, actually bottled this. Butterscotch, vanilla and toast and a generation. And this is a 30-year-old blended grain. Now, I can't remember how much this was exactly. I'll put it on the screen down below. This is not this. These are very, very different liquids. This, to my palate, it still has some of those like young grain notes poking around. I don't think in this there was enough cask love. I don't think the casks that went into this had enough to like actually do the work to the spirit that needed to be done. This is just, in my opinion, stunning. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you all very much for watching. If you've liked this video, please do drop a like, and if you'd like to support the channel, please do consider subscribing. Let me know down in the comments if you are into grain whiskey, if you like grain whiskey, if you've got any particular grains that you enjoy, or if you're considering picking up a bottle of this. As I said, I know it's expensive, but I promise you it's worth it. And on that note, slumber.